In Numas, the dead did not rest. They ruled. Beneath the lion gates and sun-blasted tombs, beneath the golden masks of princes who had forgotten mercy but not pride, 1,000 sealed vaults slept in the dark. Some held treasure, some held curses, some held kings too old to be named, but one vault held something far worse, the truth. When Menhet of the Seven Seals, a lowly scholar priest, with ink on his fingers and blood in his future, uncovers proof that a rival dynasty built its glory on a forged bloodline, he believes he has found a weapon for Numas. He is wrong, for the Black Registry does not belong to kings, priests, or cities. It belongs to the things that judged them before history learned to lie. And now, beneath the necropolis, the old guardians are waking. Bronze claws scrape stone. Corpse-scribes sharpen their pens. The dead remember, and in Nehekara, memory is never merciful. Chapter 1. Dust beneath the Lion Gate. The sun over Numas was the color of old brass, and just as merciless, it glared down upon the city's corpse-white walls, upon its lion-headed gate towers, upon the endless ranks of statues whose faces had been scoured smooth by centuries of sand. Heat shimmered over the avenues of the dead. Carrion birds circled where no carrion should have remained. Beneath the city, in vaults older than most kingdoms of men, the dead lay in ordered silence, wrapped in gold, linen, curses, and lies. Menhet of the Seven Seals preferred the lies. Bones were simple, gold was vulgar, curses were mostly badly written, but lies had shape. Lies left seams in the record, tiny fractures where one name had been scraped away and another pressed into the clay. A careless scribe might miss them. A prince would ignore them. A tomb robber would sell the tablet for beer and a night's lodging, Menhet noticed. He sat alone in the lower archive beneath the Temple of the Setting Jackal, surrounded by tablets recovered from a collapsed tribute chamber near the Lion Gate. The chamber had been found after a tremor split the pavement and swallowed 3 skeletal laborers, a priest's apprentice and half a donkey cart. The dead workers had been reassembled. The apprentice had not. A dozen corpse lamps burned with bluish corpse-fat flames around Menhet's desk, throwing a sickly glow over his narrow face. He was not yet old, though the work of the mortuary cult had already thinned him. His scalp was shaved, his beard braided with copper rings, and his linen robes were stiff with dust, ink, and grave salt. A bronze stylus rested between his fingers, like a surgeon's knife. Before him lay a tablet the color of dried blood. It listed offerings made by the lesser houses of the eastern dynasties to the tombs of Numas: oxen, dates, incense, lapis scarabs, captives, slaves, weapons. A routine inscription, dull enough to make most scribes blind with boredom. Except for the names. Menhet leaned closer. His breath stirred dust from the grooves. The dynasty of Sutek-Mar claimed descent through Prince Ketep-An, son of Eunat, son of Marok, son of Uba. That was the accepted line. That was the sacred line. It appeared on funerary pylons, royal seals, war banners, and the flaking golden masks of their dead princes. But here, on this ugly little tablet, Ketep-An was not named as son. He was named as taken in blood, adopted after slaughter, claimed by right, not birth. Menhed's fingers went cold, despite the heat choking the archive. He pulled another tablet toward him, then another. His pulse quickened. A prayer to the gods died unfinished on his lips. The same fracture appeared again, hidden under formulaic phrases and old honorifics. Different scribes, different decades. The same truth buried under ritual mud. A rival dynasty had forged its bloodline before the great age of unification, not embellished, not confused. Forged. Menhed rose so quickly his stool cracked against the stone floor. "No," he whispered. The word crawled away between shelves stacked with dead centuries. He crossed the archive to the sealed index wall, where forbidden records were named but not opened. Most scholar priests treated the wall as a shrine to things best left undisturbed. Menhed treated it as an insult. He lifted a corpse lamp and read by its cold blue light. There, a reference mark, a black triangle beneath a faded cartouche. The black registry. His mouth dried. The vault beneath the oldest district, sealed before the reigning cults had settled into their present forms, sealed before the priesthood of Numas had perfected its genealogies, sealed, according to temple law, by command of kings whose names were not to be pronounced. Menhed had heard older priests speak of it only when they thought no apprentices listened, a place where truth had been locked away because truth was more dangerous than plague. He copied the reference onto a sliver of papyrus, rolled it tight, and sealed it in wax with trembling hands. Behind him, something scraped. Menhed turned. The archive door stood open. 4 men slipped inside, wrapped in sand-colored cloth, their faces hidden behind lacquered jackal masks. Living men. That alone was obscene. No living hand but the priesthoods should have entered this level of the temple. Their bare feet made no sound on the stone. Curved knives glimmered in their fists. Menhed looked at them, then at the tablets, then back at them. "Oh," he said softly, "so it is true." The first assassin lunged. Menhed flung the corpse lamp into his face. The lamp shattered. Blue flame burst across the jackal mask, licking through the eye holes. The assassin screamed, high and wet, clawing at his burning face. Corpse fat clung greedily. His mask softened, then ran in black streams over his cheeks. He slammed into a shelf, scattering tablets that broke around his feet like brittle bones. The second killer came over the desk. Menhed stumbled backward, snatching up a bronze stylus. The assassin's knife hissed through the air and opened Menhed's sleeve from wrist to elbow. Pain flashed hot and white. Blood spattered the tablets. Menhed drove the stylus forward with both hands. It punched into the assassin's throat. Not deep enough to kill cleanly, deep enough to ruin him. The man gagged. Blood bubbled around the bronze point and sprayed across Menhed's face in warm, salty bursts. The assassin dropped his knife and clutched at the stylus, eyes bulging behind the mask. Menhed shoved him away, and he fell choking among the broken tablets, kicking his heels as his life leaked between his fingers. The third struck Menhed across the jaw with a knife hilt. The world cracked sideways. Menhed hit the floor hard. His teeth snapped together. Blood filled his mouth. He saw sandals, dust, the glitter of a knife rising for the downward thrust. He tried to crawl, but his cut arm slipped in his own blood. The blade came down. A smaller blade flashed from the shadows and buried itself in the assassin's wrist. The man howled. His knife clattered beside Menhed's ear. A woman dropped from the top of a shelving stack like a desert cat. She was lean, dark-eyed, and wrapped in patched travel leathers under a stolen temple cloak. Her black hair was tied back with a strip of red cloth. Gold rings winked in one ear. She hit the wounded assassin knee first, driving him to the ground, then tore her knife free from his wrist and rammed it under his jaw. The blade went up through soft flesh and into the skull. The assassin spasmed. His heels hammered the floor. She twisted the knife until something cracked inside his head, then let him fall. The fourth assassin hesitated. The woman grinned at him with blood on her cheek. "Wrong archive," she said. He snarled and charged. She ducked under the first slash, but the second cut caught her across the ribs, slicing leather and drawing a dark line of blood. Her grin vanished. She slammed her forehead into his mask. The lacquer cracked. He reeled. She hooked one foot behind his ankle and drove him backward into a table covered in funerary jars. They shattered beneath him. Powdered organs, sacred oils, and ancient dust exploded into the air. The assassin thrashed in the mess, coughing. The woman seized a broken jar and smashed it into his face. Once, twice. On the third blow, the jackal mask caved inward. On the fourth, his nose flattened into red pulp. On the fifth, teeth skittered across the floor like dropped beads. He still moved, so she took up his own curved knife and hacked into his neck. The first blow opened him. The second struck bone. The third bit through enough that his head lolled sideways on a wet hinge. Blood pumped over the stone in thick pulses, soaking the dust black. Silence returned in pieces. The burning assassin had stopped screaming. He lay against the shelves, his head a charred lump, fingers curled like claws. The one Menhead had stabbed in the throat made a faint, bubbling sound, then stopped. Menhead pushed himself upright, dizzy and trembling. The woman wiped her knife on the dead man's robe and looked him over. "You're bleeding," she said. "You are not meant to be here," Menhead replied. "No," she said, "but I'm very good at it." He stared at her, then at the small pouch hanging from her belt. It bulged with temple seals, bronze charms, and at least one funerary ring he recognized from a minor noble's catalogued remains. "A tomb robber," he said. "Guide," she corrected, "with flexible morals." The archive trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams. Far below, beneath stone and sand and layers of carefully arranged death, something answered the violence with a long, grinding groan. It sounded like a door remembering how to open. It sounded like a giant dragging one bronze fingernail along the underside of the world. Menhead froze. The woman heard it too. Her face lost its mockery. What was that? Menhead looked down at the blood-spattered tablets, at the broken jackal masks, at the forbidden reference clutched in his shaking hand. "Old trouble," he said. Bootsteps rattled in the passage outside. Not soft assassin steps this time. Heavy, measured, dead. A file of skeletal retainers entered the archive, bronze khopesh blades drawn, shields bearing the lion sigil of Numas. Behind them came a palanquin of blackened gold, borne by 4 silent skeletons. Upon it sat Prince Achmenath, his mummified hands resting on the arms of his throne, his death mask shaped into a sneer of eternal authority. His empty eye sockets burned with green witchlight. Menhead bowed, despite the blood running down his chin. "My prince," he said. Achmenath surveyed the corpses. "Scholar priest," the prince rasped, his voice dry as stones sliding in a tomb. "You have made a mess in my archive." Menhead held up the papyrus slip. "I have found a lie, Lord, a great one." The prince's gaze fixed on the seal. For a moment, even the corpse lamps seemed to dim. "The Black Registry," Ahmenath said. The tomb robber muttered a curse under her breath. Menhet heard again that deep grinding from below. Older than dynasties, older than pride, older perhaps than the gods who still bothered to listen. Ahmenath raised one gilded hand. "Then we descend," he said. "Wake the gods, seal the gates. Let no jackal flee Numas before dawn." The skeletal soldiers turned as one. Menhet pressed a strip of linen to his bleeding arm. The tomb robber retrieved her knives, including the one still lodged in the assassin's ruined wrist. She caught Menhet watching and shrugged. "Flexible morals," she reminded him. Together, priest, thief, prince, and the obedient dead passed beneath the archive stairs and into the buried processional tunnel below the temple. Behind them, the corpse lamps flickered over 4 cooling bodies and tablets stained red with newly spilled blood. Ahead, under the lion gate, something vast shifted in its sleep, and in the dark, stone began to breathe. Chapter 2. The Sealed Quarter. The tunnel beneath the temple of the setting jackal had not been made for the living. Menhet understood that at once, though he had passed through 100 buried passages in the underways of Numas. Those had been tomb roads, embalming ducts, servant ways, priestly corridors, narrow veins cut through the body of the necropolis. They had purpose. They had measurements. They had prayers carved into their lintels and the comforting repetition of sacred geometry. This tunnel was older. It sloped downward in crooked angles, its walls fashioned from black stone, veined with dull red mineral that looked disturbingly like dried blood. No torch brackets marked the way. No guardian cartouches promised safe passage to faithful servants. The ceiling pressed low overhead, forcing Menhet to stoop. The air tasted of hot dust, old metal, and something bitter that clung to the back of his tongue. Behind him came the click and scrape of skeletal feet. Prince Ahmenath's retainers marched in 2 ranks, khopesh blades drawn, their shields held close to their rib cages. The prince himself rode in his palanquin, borne by 4 deathless servants whose spines creaked under the weight of gold and arrogance. His witch-light eyes burned within his mask, painting the tunnel walls green. Caressa walked beside Menhet, one hand pressed to the cut along her ribs. She had wrapped it with a strip torn from an assassin's robe, but blood had already soaked through. "You priests always take the welcoming roads," she muttered. "This passage predates my order," Menhet said. That was not an answer. It was the only answer I liked. She spat to one side. The spit hit dust and vanished. Above them, Numas slept in its embalmed grandeur. Below, the old city waited. They reached a door after what felt like an hour, but might have been minutes. Time behaved poorly beneath tombs. It sagged and stretched, snagging on old curses. The door was a slab of dark basalt set into the tunnel mouth, wider than a chariot, and carved with figures Menhet did not recognize. That frightened him more than the assassins had. He had spent his life among the dead languages of Nehekara. He could recite burial registers from memory, identify royal houses by the shape of a kneecap painted on a sarcophagus, distinguish honest dynastic boasting from fraudulent dynastic boasting at 40 paces. But these figures were strange. Men without crowns, stood in rows before seated shapes whose faces had been deliberately gouged away. Above them hovered a sun disk, split by a knife. Beneath them, kings lay on their backs, while faceless judges measured their hearts against stones. "Open it," Prince Achmenath commanded. Menet touched the carvings with the tips of his fingers. The stone was warm. "My lord," he said carefully, "this door bears no royal names, no civic seal, no dedication to gods recognized by the present mortuary cult. Then it is unclaimed," Achmenath rasped. "And what is unclaimed beneath Numas belongs to Numas." Caressa looked at Menhet. "Does he always say things that make ancient curses more likely?" Menhet ignored her. He found a depression in the stone shaped like a palm, though the hand it had been made for possessed 7 fingers. Around it, the warning script ran in a savage, archaic form. He read, slowly, "Let no king wake those who judged kings." The prince's fingers tightened on the arms of his palanquin. "Open it," he repeated. Menhet placed his hand into the depression. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something inside the door exhaled. Dust burst from the seams. Deep within the walls, mechanisms began to grind awake, not with the crisp precision of later Neacharen craft, but with the brutal reluctance of things made before beauty mattered. Stone teeth dragged over stone teeth. Hidden counterweights groaned. The basalt slabs sank into the floor, inch by grinding inch, revealing blackness beyond. A smell rolled out. Not rot. Not exactly. It was the smell of sealed air, trapped for so many centuries that it had become almost solid. It smelled of old offerings, powdered bone, dry incense, and dead men who had been too important to decay honestly. Caressa covered her mouth. "Gods below, do not invoke unknown powers here," Menhet said. "I was invoking whichever ones are furthest away." They stepped through. The sealed quarter lay beneath Numas, like the fossil of a murdered city. It was not a chamber but a buried district, an underworld of narrow streets, low temples, broken courtyards, and squat stone towers crushed under the weight of later ages. Sand lay in drifts along the avenues, though no wind should have reached so deep. Black pillars rose from the gloom, their tops lost in darkness. Statues lined the road, but they were not the proud kings and hawk-headed gods Menhet knew. These were severe things. Kneeling scribes with sewn mouths, women holding bowls of teeth, warriors with their own heads tucked beneath their arms. The corpse lamps carried by the skeletal retainers burned lower here. Their blue flames bent away from certain doorways as though frightened. Menhet moved in a daze, reading what he could. Fragments of old law, funerary tallies, names chiseled out, titles smashed flat. Everywhere, the same violence against memory. "Someone tried to kill history down here," he whispered. "Looks like history put up a fight," Caressa said. They passed beneath an arch carved with lions, devouring serpents. Beyond it stretched a broad processional avenue leading toward the deeper vaults. The stones underfoot were painted with faded red lines. Menhet crouched and brushed away dust. "Blood channels," he said. Caressa stopped walking. "What?" "Symbolic, perhaps, for offerings." "Perhaps," she said. "That word kills more fools than knives." A skeletal retainer marched ahead of them. Its foot came down on one of the red lines. The avenue screamed. Not with a voice, but with metal. The stones split open along both sides of the street. Bronze blades scythed out at waist height, moving so fast they were only a blur. The first rank of skeletons came apart instantly. Pelvises spun away from spines. Ribs burst outward in showers of dry bone. One skull flew past Menhed's face, jaw still chattering, before smashing against a pillar. A blade clipped the palanquin bearers. One skeleton lost both legs and collapsed, pitching Ameneth's throne sideways. The prince snarled as his retainers lurched to steady him. "Back!" Menhed shouted. Caressa grabbed his robe and yanked him down just as a bronze crescent hissed through the space where his throat had been. The blade shaved hair from his scalp and struck the wall with a wet clang of ancient oil. He hit the floor hard enough to drive breath from his lungs. Another retainer tried to retreat. The floor opened under it. A stone jaw lined with metal spikes snapped shut from below, biting the skeleton in half. Its upper body clawed at the flagstones, fingers scraping sparks, before a second jaw slammed down and crushed its skull into powder. The avenue shook with repeated impacts. Blades chopped, jaws snapped, hidden gears hammered. The dead of Numas, obedient and fearless, walked into the trap because no fear remained in them to teach caution. They were butchered like meatless cattle. Caressa crawled forward on her belly, eyes narrowed, counting the rhythm. 3 heartbeats between blades, she said. You count heartbeats during this? I count anything that keeps mine inside my chest. She rolled, sprang, and landed between 2 red lines. A blade swept behind her, close enough to cut loose strands of her hair. She flattened herself against a statue as another trap shrieked from the opposite wall. Then she drove her knife into a narrow slot beneath the statue's foot and twisted. Something cracked. The blades on one side jammed, juddering in place. "Move!" she shouted. Menhed ran bent double, clutching his wounded arm. A blade caught the edge of his robe and tore it away. He felt the kiss of metal along his hip, felt warmth spill down his leg, but he did not stop. Behind him, Ameneth's remaining bearers lurched through the opening, while skeletal guards threw themselves into the working blades, jamming mechanisms with their own bodies. Bone splintered. Bronze teeth chewed through ribs and arms. A skull split open under pressure, releasing a puff of embalming dust. They reached the far side, with half their escort destroyed. Caressa leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Blood ran freely down her side now. Menhed stared back at the avenue. Skeletal hands still twitched among the traps. "This place does not recognize royal passage," he said. Ameneth's mask turned slowly toward him. "Then it will learn," they continued. Deeper in the quarter, the architecture changed. The streets narrowed, becoming channels between windowless buildings. Above, ancient stone bridges crossed from rooftop to rooftop. Menhed began to see movement on them. At first he thought it was dust falling. Then one of the shapes dropped. It landed on a skeletal guard and drove it flat with a crunch of bone. The thing was shaped like a scorpion but made of black bronze, its legs jointed with ivory pins, its tail tipped by a hooked blade, wet with green venom that should have dried into nothing long ago. Its body bore a human face, hammered into the metal, mouth open in silent accusation. More came skittering from wall niches. "Scorpions!" Caressa shouted. The first construct struck. Its tail punched through a skeleton's shield, through the sternum behind it, and out the spine. The bones convulsed as green fire crawled through them. Then the skeleton exploded, scattering burning fragments across the street. Menhed ducked behind a pillar as another scorpion lunged. Its claw snapped shut where his head had been, shearing a chunk from the stone. Chips sliced his cheek. He jammed his staff into its face and felt the bronze mask cave inward under the desperate blow. The thing did not die. It climbed up the staff toward him, legs scraping, tail rising. Caressa came from the side and hacked 2 legs off at the joints. The scorpion toppled. Menhead seized a fallen Khopesh and brought it down with both hands. The blade bit into the construct's neck. Once, twice. On the 3rd blow, something inside ruptured and sprayed black oil over his robes. The scorpion thrashed, then stilled. All around them, the street became slaughter. Ahmenath's skeletons fought without grace but with terrible persistence, dragging constructs down under piles of hacking blades. Scorpion tails punched through skulls. Claws sheared arms away. Bone dust mixed with ancient oil until the pavement became slick and treacherous. One scorpion leapt onto a palanquin bearer and rammed its tail through the skeleton's skull, pinning it upright. Ahmenath rose from his throne with a hiss of rage, drew a curved blade from beneath his wrappings, and cut the construct in half with one sweeping stroke. Black oil splashed across his golden mask. "Things of no dynasty," he snarled. "Scrap things. Forgotten things." The answer came from the walls. A deep ticking. Many ticks. Many legs. From every niche along the street, bronze bodies unfolded. Caressa grabbed Menhit by the collar. "Run now. Theology later." They ran. The street spilled them onto the edge of a dry underground canal, spanned by a bridge of cracked stone. The canal bed lay 30 feet below, filled not with water but with drifts of grey dust and the jutting backs of half-buried statues. On the far side stood another basalt door, smaller than the first, marked with the black triangle of the registry. Menhet's heart lurched. "There," he said. A knife flashed out of the darkness and struck the skeleton beside him in the eye socket. Living men emerged from the far end of the bridge. 6 of them. Sand-colored wrappings, jackal masks, curved knives and hooked spears. Behind them stood a taller figure in a saffron cloak, his mask lacquered black with gold lines around the eyes. The saffron jackal. He lifted one gloved hand. "No further, priest of Numas." Ahmenath made a sound like stone cracking. "Kill them." The bridge became a butcher's yard. Skeletal guards charged with shields high. The assassins met them with spears, hooking ribs, wrenching skulls from spines, stamping bones into fragments. One killer vaulted over a shield and landed among the dead soldiers, spinning low, his twin blades chopping through knee joints. Skeletons collapsed around him, clawing and biting even as he hacked them apart. Caressa threw a knife into his ear. It punched through the mask and sank to the hilt. The assassin dropped, as if a cord had been cut, limbs twitching. Menhead saw the saffron jackal point at him. A carrion spirit tore itself from the assassin's shadow. It was a ragged thing of feathers, ribs, and a long hooked beak, translucent and stinking of grave wind. It shrieked into Menhet's face and drove spectral claws through his chest. No flesh opened, but cold agony flooded him. He felt fingers of ice scrape his heart. He tasted ashes from a funeral he had never attended. He fell to one knee. Caressa slashed at the spirit. Her blade passed through it uselessly. Menhet forced blood into his mouth, bit his tongue, and spat across his own palm. With shaking fingers, he drew a warding seal on the bridgestone. "In the name of the buried sun," he gasped, bewayed. The spirit recoiled, the seal flared blue-white. For one instant, the carrion thing had weight. Caressa saw it, and moved like a striking asp. Her second knife, bronze, and stolen from a sanctified tomb, cut across the spirit's throat. The thing burst apart in a blast of cold feathers and screaming dust. Then the canal below erupted. A bronze crocodile thing climbed from the grey drifts, vast jaws opening wide enough to swallow a horse. Its hide was plated in verdigris scales. Human hands protruded from its flanks, dragging it upward over the canal wall. It snapped one assassin in half at the waist. The man's scream ended between its teeth. His upper body vanished. His legs kicked once, spraying blood over the bridge, before the beast gulped them down too. Another crocodile rose behind it, then a third. The bridge cracked beneath the chaos. Menhet staggered toward the far door, half dragged by Caressa. Ahmenath's remaining guards formed a ragged wall behind them, hacking at assassins and constructs alike. The saffron jackal retreated with infuriating calm, his cloak snapping in the stale air. "You will open what should remain sealed," he called, "and it will eat your city from below." Menhet reached the basalt door. Its surface bore the same warning as before, carved deeper, harsher. "Let no king wake those who judged kings." Behind him, a crocodile's jaws closed around a skeleton and crushed it into glittering splinters. An assassin screamed as Caressa opened his belly and kicked him backward into the canal, his intestines uncoiling behind him like wet rope. Menhet pressed his bloodied hand against the black triangle. The door trembled. Far beneath them, something answered. Not a groan this time, a breath. The sealed quarter inhaled, and the door began to open. Chapter 3. The Judges Without Names. The door opened like a wound in the world. Black stone sank into black stone, grinding downward with a noise that made Menhet's teeth ache in his skull. Dust poured from the seams in choking sheets. The air beyond was colder than it should have been, cold enough to turn the sweat on his shaved scalp clammy and make the blood on his hand thicken against his palm. Behind him, the bridge over the dry canal shook under the weight of battle. A bronze crocodile thing had dragged itself halfway onto the span, its plated belly scraping sparks from the stone. One of Prince Ahmenath's skeletal retainers clung to its jaw with both hands, while another hacked uselessly at its snout. The beast snapped once. The skeleton vanished from the ribs upward. Bone fragments pattered across the bridge like hail. The crocodile chewed twice, gears churning inside its throat, then spat out a spray of powdered rib and bronze wire. Caressa shoved Menhet through the opening. "Inside," she snarled, "unless you plan to debate the door." Menhet stumbled into darkness and nearly fell. The chamber beyond swallowed the corpse lamplight. It was vast, wider than the avenue outside, with a ceiling lost behind hanging veils of dust and old incense smoke. The floor had been polished once, long before the priests of Numas began painting their dead with gold, but now it was scored by cracks and crusted with grey sand. 3 archways stood ahead in a row, each sealed by a curtain of dangling bronze tablets etched with archaic signs. The remaining skeletons lurched in after him. Ahmenath's palanquin followed, its bearers reduced to 3, one dragging a splintered leg behind it with dry persistence. The prince sat rigid upon his throne, his gold mask streaked with black oil from the scorpion constructs. His green eyes burned with humiliation. Caressa came last. She spun as she entered and hurled a knife back through the narrowing gap. It struck an assassin in the throat just as he leapt for the threshold. He hit the edge of the door with a wet cough, fingers clawing at the handle jutting from his neck. The stone slab rose again, catching him at the waist. He screamed once. The door kept rising. His scream became a bubbling gargle as the basalt crushed him against the lintel. His ribs folded inward with a series of muffled cracks. Blood poured down the inner face of the door in black-red ropes. When the slab sealed shut, only one hand remained on their side, twitching at the wrist before going still. Caressa looked at it. "Waste of a knife," she said. Menhet tried to answer, and found he could not. The chamber had taken hold of him. Words covered the walls. Not prayers, not boasts, not praises to gods or kings. These were questions, thousands of them, carved in savage, precise lines, from floor to ceiling. Some had been answered in red pigment, others had been gouged out. Many had been left open, waiting. Who first wore the crown? Who first lied beneath it? Who was born to rule? Who ruled because all others were dead? Who made a father from a corpse and a dynasty from a knife? Menhet's blood went cold. "This is not an archive entrance," he whispered. "It is a court." Arkmenath's fingers flexed against the arms of his palanquin. "All courts require a judge," the prince rasped. "Find a judge, scholar. Make it recognize my authority," Caressa snorted. "That has worked very well so far." Achmenath turned his death mask toward her. "Tief, when this is done, I will have your hands taken and set them to crawl forever across the floor of my treasury, so they may steal dust and nothing else." Caressa's smile was thin and ugly. "You'll have to catch them first." Menhet stepped between them before the prince could answer. He could feel the chamber listening. The first archway shivered. The bronze tablets hanging before it clattered together, though no wind touched them. A voice emerged from the metal, many voices layered into one, dry and solemn. "Name those erased." Menhet swallowed. The tablets shifted. Upon them appeared cartouches, half-formed, scratched, defaced. Some bore only the first reed stroke of a name. Others showed broken titles, the remains of royal claims stripped down to bones. The first trial. He approached, every instinct screaming caution. Behind the hanging tablets, the archway waited in darkness. On either side of it stood two statues of kneeling scribes, their mouths sewn shut with bronze thread. Each held a stone pallet in both hands. Menhet read the fragments. "Nekhemur," he said, slowly. "Third claimant of the Red Crown, after the year of drought." The tablet glowed faintly, then stilled. Another, Tahuset, sister wife to the Jackal throne, murdered before coronation. A second glow. The chamber breathed. He moved faster now, mind racing through obscure burial formulae and discarded genealogies. These were not famous kings. They were inconvenient ones. Dead heirs, failed queens, brothers erased by brothers, children whose reigns had lasted as long as a blade stroke in a dark room. Hetepra of the broken bowl, Ionet, who ruled from the southern tomb, Meraka, the uncounted, Saket, born without royal blood but crowned by army acclamation after the Ash Plague. At that name, Prince Achmenath hissed, "An army cannot crown a king." The chamber went silent. The bronze tablets swung toward him. Menhet turned sharply. "My prince, do not. Blood crowns kings," Ahmenath said, rising from his throne. "Blood sanctified by death. Blood preserved by right. Blood older than the ambitions of soldiers and scribes." The kneeling statues lifted their heads. Their sewn mouths opened, ripping bronze thread through stone lips with a sound like nails tearing from flesh. One of the remaining skeletal guards stepped toward the prince protectively. The statue on the left spat a needle of black metal. It struck the skeleton in the forehead. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every bone in its body unfolded outward. Ribs peeled away from the spine. Arms twisted backward. The skull split neatly down the center, each half blooming open like a dry flower. The guard collapsed into a heap of separated pieces, every joint undone, every sacred binding broken. Caressa stared. "I hate this room." Menhet raised both hands. "Saket," he said loudly, forcing his voice steady, "was crowned by army acclamation and confirmed by funerary rite after death. His reign lasted 41 days. His name was erased by the house of Marak." The bronze tablets glowed. The statues lowered their heads. The first archway opened. No one moved for several breaths. Ahmenath returned slowly to his seat, hatred burning in his empty eyes. Menhet passed through the archway first. The second chamber was narrower, its walls painted with scenes of feasting. At first glance they seemed almost merry. Princes raising cups, queens watching dancers, priests offering incense. Then the corpse lamps brightened, and the rest became clear. Beneath every banquet table lay bodies. Behind every throne stood a knife-bearer. The wine in every cup was painted the same dark red as the wounds on the dead. At the far end waited a scale made of bone and black iron. The many-voiced metal spoke again. Which houses were born in honor, and which in murder? Caressa gave a humorless laugh. "That seems unfair. Surely the answer is all of them." Menhet almost smiled despite himself. Then he saw the floor. Names were carved into the paving stones, dozens of dynasties and lesser houses. Some Menhet knew, some he knew only from forbidden marginalia. Some were so ancient they were little more than sounds in dead mouths. A skeletal retainer stepped forward before Menhet could stop it. Its foot landed on a house name. The painted figures on the walls turned their heads. A knife came out of the mural, not painted, real. Long, narrow, and slick as though freshly drawn from a living gut. It flashed across the chamber and opened the skeleton from collarbone to pelvis. The dead thing staggered, its sternum split. A second knife came from the opposite wall and took off its head. The skull bounced twice, jaw clacking, before rolling to Menhet's feet. Then the wall figures resumed their feasting. Caressa swore softly. "No more walking unless the priest says so," she told the remaining guards. Menhet studied the names. This trial was worse. The first had required memory. This required judgment. He placed one foot carefully on a blank stone. "The house of Sutechmar," he said, "was born in murder. The brother Ketep An was taken in blood and named son after the slaughter of the true heirs." The scale tipped. One bone pan descended. "The house of Karops," he continued, "born in honor, though later corrupted. Founded by oath marriage and defended succession." Another movement. "The line of the amber vulture." Murder. A knife slid out of the wall, slow as a tongue, then withdrew. Correct. The daughters of Ionet. Honor. The wall hissed. Wrong. The floor beneath Menhed cracked. Caressa seized his collar and yanked him backward as a spear thrust up from below, punching through the space between his legs. Its point grazed his thigh, slicing cloth and skin. Pain flared. Blood ran down his shin. Menhed collapsed against her, breathing hard. "Careful!" she snapped. "I was careful. You were nearly a priest kebab." Menhed shut his eyes, forcing himself to remember. The daughters of Ionet. The public record praised them as temple-sanctioned heirs, but an older lament from the western necropolis mentioned drowned infants, a basin, a locked birthing room. He tasted bile. "Murder," he corrected. "Born in murder, preserved by temple silence." The spear withdrew. The scale balanced. So it went, name by name. Honor, murder, murder disguised as honor. Honor ruined by murder but not born from it. Menhed bled through his robe and answered until his voice turned hoarse. Each wrong breath threatened blades. Each hesitation made the painted feaster smile wider. At last, the scale cracked down the middle. The second door opened. The third chamber had no walls. Or rather, its walls were hidden in darkness so complete that the chamber seemed to hang above an endless pit. A narrow bridge of pale stone crossed the void to a circular dais. Upon the dais stood a throne with no back, no arms, and no ornament. A crown lay on the seat, not gold, stone, plain, heavy, brutal. The bronze voice spoke for the final time. "What makes a king?" Ahmenath rose immediately. "Blood," he said. The bridge cracked beneath the palanquin. Menhed felt the answer rejected before the sound had finished echoing. The darkness below stirred. Something far beneath them unfolded long fingers and dragged them across stone. "No," Menhed said. Ahmenath's head snapped toward him. "You forget yourself. I remember where we are." The prince descended from his palanquin. His mummy wrappings trailed behind him like old skin. A king is blood made eternal. A king is lineage preserved beyond death. A king is the vessel through which the city remembers itself. The bridge cracked again. One bearer slipped. It fell without a sound, vanishing into the black. Caressa edged away from the drop. "Try a better answer." Menhed looked at the crown. He thought of tablets scraped clean. He thought of princes murdering brothers, daughters drowning heirs, armies crowning survivors, priests painting over crimes with prayers. He thought of Numas, beautiful and rotting, held together by pride and old lies. "A king," he said slowly, "is one whose rule is accepted by the dead after the living can no longer be threatened." The chamber waited. The bridge held. Then Caressa, bleeding and filthy and entirely unimpressed, laughed. "No," she said. "A king is whoever can keep the knives from his back long enough to make everyone else kneel." The crown on the throne split. A shock passed through the chamber. The darkness below roared upward. The bridge convulsed, throwing Menhed to his knees. Ahmenath staggered, but did not fall. Caressa dropped flat, digging her fingers into a crack in the stone. From the void rose figures in black. They climbed without ladders, without haste, as though the darkness itself lifted them. 3 at first, then 6, then 9. They were tall, taller than any living man, wrapped in linen so old it had turned the color of smoke. Their bodies were withered but immense, their shoulders broad beneath mantles of black funerary plates. Their faces were hidden behind smooth masks of dark metal, with no eyes, no mouths, no markings, except a vertical line cut down the center. Each carried a crescent blade forged from meteoric iron, its edge dull and starless. The remaining skeletons raised their weapons. The first judge moved. Its blade swept once. 3 skeletal guards came apart at the waist, not shattered, severed. Their upper halves slid from their hips and struck the floor, arms still clawing, khopesh blades still cutting at nothing. The judge stepped through them, as if through reeds. Another retainer charged. A black-masked hand closed around its skull and squeezed. The skull collapsed with a dry crunch, eye sockets folding inward, jaw bursting loose. The body dropped. The judge opened its fist and let bone powder drift between its fingers. Prince Ahmenath drew himself to full height. "I am Ahmenath of Numas," he thundered, "Prince of the Lion Gate, scion of the—" A judge turned toward him. The prince stopped. For the first time since Menhet had known him, Ahmenath sounded afraid. The bronze tablets from the first chamber began to clatter in the distance. The scale in the second chamber groaned. The broken crown on the throne bled sand from its crack. Menhet forced himself upright despite the pain in his thigh and arm. "We seek the Black Registry," he said. The nearest judge lowered its blank mask toward him. When it spoke, the voice came not from its mouth, for it had none, but from the stone beneath their feet. "All who seek truth seek a weapon." Menhet's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. "I seek record. All records are weapons." Ahmenath found his courage again, though it had curdled into rage. "You will yield the vault to Numas." The judges looked at him, all of them at once. "No king commands those who judged kings." Caressa, still crouched by the edge of the bridge, whispered, "That was carved on the door, twice." Menhet bowed his head. "What is required?" The nearest judge raised its crescent blade and touched the point to Menhet's chest. It did not pierce him. Not flesh, something deeper. Menhet felt it against his name, against a secret part of him the mortuary rites claimed would survive death. Cold flooded his bones. "Open the registry," the judge said, "and its truth cannot be hidden." The blade pressed harder. Menhet gasped. "Open the registry," it continued, "and its truth cannot be altered." His knees shook. "Open the registry, and its truth cannot be used in part while the rest is buried." Ahmenath snarled. "Unacceptable." Menhet looked at the prince, then at Caressa, then into the smooth blank mask of the thing before him. Every instinct told him to refuse. Every lesson of the priesthood told him truth existed to serve order. Every law of Numas told him the dead must be honored, the city preserved, the lineages maintained. But he had seen the erased names. He had watched the walls punish convenient answers with knives. He had stood before a crown that cracked when flattered. He was afraid. That mattered. A man who felt no fear before truth was either a fool or already damned. "I accept," Menhet said. The judge withdrew its blade. The darkness behind the throne split open. Beyond it, lay a vastness of shelves, stairways, hanging chains, and distant blue fires. Clay tablets stretched into the deep like the bricks of an underground city. Corpse-scribes sat in endless rows, their dead hands moving, their reed pens scratching, scratching. Voices whispered genealogies in 1,000 dialects, naming fathers, mothers, bastards, murderers, usurpers, saints, frauds, and kings. The Black Registry. Caressa stared into it and breathed. There had better be treasure. Prince Achmenath said nothing. Menhet saw the green light in his eyes sharpen into something dangerous and mean. Behind them, the judges without names stood silent with their crescent blades lowered, not servants, not allies, not guardians in any comforting sense. Witnesses. Menhet stepped toward the registry. In the dark behind him, the broken stone crown continued to bleed sand. Chapter 4. The Black Registry. The Black Registry did not sleep. It worked. Menhet heard it before he understood the scale of it. The dry rasp of reed pens over papyrus, the scrape of bronze styluses through wet clay, the click of bone beads on counting cords, the whispered recital of names by mouths that had forgotten breath. The sound filled the hollow beneath Numas like insect wings in a skull. The vault stretched away into darkness, so vast the corpse lamps could not conquer it. Shelves of black cedar rose in crooked towers. Clay tablets were stacked in walls, higher than temple pylons. Scrolls hung in bronze cages from chains that vanished into the gloom above. Narrow bridges crossed between archive stacks. Spiral stairs plunged into lower galleries. Everywhere, corpse-scribes sat at stone desks, their mummified fingers moving with relentless precision. They were not like the obedient skeletons of Numas. These dead had faces of parchment and sinew, eyes sewn shut with hair-thin wire, jaws propped open by little wedges of ivory. Their hands had been preserved with terrible care, each finger wrapped separately so it might continue its duty beyond death. Some wrote with ink, some scratched into clay, some carved names into strips of bone. None looked up as Menhet entered. That was worse than being noticed. Caressa kept close to him, her knives bare in both hands. The wound across her ribs had darkened her leathers. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder at the judges without names, who followed at a distance, silent beneath their smooth black masks. Prince Achmenath's palanquin floated behind them, borne now by only 2 skeletal servants and the dragging remains of a third. The prince's posture was rigid, but Menhet saw the tension in his withered fingers. Even dead royalty could feel the weight of a place that cared nothing for crowns. Menhet moved toward the nearest desk. A corpse-scribe wrote upon a long sheet of yellowed papyrus. Its pen scratched in a language so archaic the letters seemed more like wounds than words. Beside it lay a stack of tablets marked with the black triangle. Menhet lifted one carefully. Names, generations, bloodlines. His scholar's mind seized them hungrily despite the fear curdling his belly. There it was again. Sutek Mar, the rival house, the proud line, the sanctified claim. False, not merely clouded by adoption, as the first tablets had implied. Entire branches were grafted on after the slaughter. Dead children had been renamed, bastards elevated. A slave-born war captain written into nobility through the corpse of a murdered prince. The proof was clean, exact, merciless. Menhet felt a fierce thrill. Then he read the next tablet. House corpse, false in the 3rd generation. The line of the amber vulture, twice broken, once restored by a priestly forgery. The sapphire throne of Kasabar, founded by poison. The lesser line of Numas beneath the lion gate. Menhet stopped breathing. He drew the tablet close until the signs blurred before his eyes. He wiped dust away with his thumb. The grooves remained. The claim of Numas to 3 burial estates in the eastern necropolis rested upon descent from Lord Mahet Ul, keeper of the 5th lion standard, honored ancestor of the city's temple houses. According to the Black Registry, Mahet Ul had not existed, not as a man. He had been assembled from 2 dead brothers, one obscure priest, and a victory hymn. A useful ancestor, a legal ghost. A fraud given offerings until the lie grew bones. Menhet's hand trembled. Caressa saw his face. Bad? Worse than bad, he whispered. Ahmenath's palanquin scraped nearer. What have you found? Menhet did not answer quickly enough. The prince reached down with one gilded hand. Give it to me. My lord, give it to me. Menhet held out the tablet. Ahmenath took it and read. The green flame in his eye sockets guttered. For an instant he was still as any corpse in any tomb. Then his fingers closed. Clay cracked. The tablet snapped in half. Menhet flinched as though struck. No! Ahmenhet crushed the fragments until they fell from his hand as dust. That record was damaged when we entered, the prince said. Caressa stared at him. I watched you break it. The prince turned his mask toward her. Then watch less. Menhet's shock hardened into anger. He stepped forward, heedless of the prince's rank, of the skeletal guards, of the judges watching in the gloom. You cannot destroy this place piece by piece and call it preservation. I can do what Numas requires. Numas is not a lie. Numas is whatever survives. The words struck harder than the assassin's knives had. Menhet looked past the prince at the endless shelves, at the corpse-scribes writing with blind devotion, at the old dead laboring to preserve truths newer priests had buried under gold. Ahmenath leaned closer. You will copy the records of Sutekmar, he said. All of them. You will omit any reference to Numas. You will seal your tongue with oath and ash. If you refuse, I will have you unwrapped alive and hung in the drying chamber until your wisdom blows away grain by grain. Menhet felt fear move through him. It was not shameful. Fear was an honest thing. It told the truth when pride became stupid. No, he said. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, something laughed in the shadows. Not Caressa, not Menhet, not any dead thing sworn to Numas. A soft, rasping laugh from behind the archive stacks. The saffron jackal stepped into the corpse light with a curved blade in one hand and a bronze fire flask in the other. His black and gold mask had been cracked down one cheek. Blood darkened the saffron cloak at his shoulder, but he stood upright, elegant and poisonous. Behind him came 3 surviving assassins and 2 things that had once been men before. Desert rites hollowed them out. Their bodies were wrapped in strips of vulture skin. Their arms ended in bundles of hooked bone. Carrion spirits flickered inside their rib cages like trapped lightning. "You see," the jackal said, "all princes become honest in the dark. Ah," Meneth drew his blade. "Defiler." The jackal bowed slightly. "Preserver, my lord, there is a difference only when one wins." He hurled the fire flask. Menhet shouted and threw himself sideways. The flask shattered against a shelf of scrolls. For one heartbeat the liquid inside glistened like oil. Then green fire roared upward with a sound like a crowd screaming through clenched teeth. Scrolls curled black. Bronze cages glowed. A corpse-scribe at the nearest desk caught fire, but did not stop writing. Its wrappings burned away from its arm. Its fingers blackened to claws. Still the pen scratched on until the hand itself broke apart and fell into ash. Then the vault erupted. The assassins charged. Ahmenad's remaining skeletons met them among the desks. One assassin ducked under a khopesh and drove his knife through a skeleton's spine, twisting until vertebrae popped apart like beads from a snapped cord. Another was seized by a skeletal guard and bitten in the face. Teeth cracked through his mask, tore away his cheek, and exposed the red meat beneath. He screamed and stabbed wildly into the skeleton's ribs until Caressa came in low and opened his thigh from knee to groin. Blood burst out hot and dark. The assassin collapsed, trying to hold himself together. Caressa kicked him under the chin hard enough to snap his head back, then drove her knife through the soft place beneath his jaw. He jerked once and went slack. Menhet crawled toward the scattered tablets, choking on smoke. The green fire spread too quickly, crawling over shelves like a living thing. It did not burn cleanly. It ate names first. Ink vanished from scrolls before the papyrus caught. Clay tablets cracked as their inscriptions glowed and melted smooth. "No!" Menhet gasped. "No, no, no!" A carrion-bound wretch leapt onto a desk and shrieked. The sound was full of grave wind. One of the corpse-scribes finally lifted its sewn-shut face. The wretch's hooked bone hands plunged into the scribe's chest and tore it open. Dry organs spilled across the desk in a grey tumble. The corpse-scribe kept moving, one hand scrabbling for its pen, the other clutching at the record it had been writing. Caressa hurled a knife into the wretch's ribs. It stuck there, useless. The thing turned toward her. She swore and ran as it sprang, its hooked arms slicing furrows in the stone where she had stood. It chased her along a row of desks, smashing corpse-scribes aside, ripping through hanging scrolls, its ribcage flickering with the spirit trapped inside. The saffron jackal came for Menhet. Menhet barely got the khopesh up in time. The jackal's blade struck his with a sharp clang that jarred his wounded arm to the shoulder. Pain nearly dropped him. The jackal moved like silk around a knife. His second slash cut Menhet across the brow. Blood sheeted into one eye. The third opened his robe across the chest, shallow but burning. "You should have left dead lies alone," the jackal said. Menhet retreated, slipping on ash and old dust. "You murdered men to hide a genealogy. I murdered men to prevent armies from rising over it. You expect me to call that wisdom? I expect you to die confused." The jackal lunged. Menhet fell backward over a stool. The curved blade passed so close it sliced the tip from his braid. He hit the floor, rolled, and seized a clay tablet from a fallen stack. As the jackal came down on him, Menhet smashed it into his knee. Clay shattered. The jackal grunted and staggered. Menhet drove the broken edge of the tablet into the man's calf. It sank through cloth and muscle with a wet crunch. The jackal hissed, kicked Menhet in the ribs, and sent him sprawling. Menhet felt something crack inside him. Breath fled his lungs in a burst of spit and blood. Across the gallery, Caressa had turned on the carrion wretch. She let it chase her beneath a hanging chain, then leapt aside at the last instant. The thing crashed into a suspended bronze cage full of tablets. Caressa hacked at the chain pin with both knives. Once, twice, the pin snapped. The cage fell. It crushed the wretch from shoulders to hips. Its skull hit the floor and burst like rotten fruit, spraying black dust and bone shards. The trapped spirit inside its ribs screamed free, a ragged vulture shape of smoke and teeth. Caressa snatched up one of the fallen tablets, saw the black triangle on it, and slammed it against the spirit's beak. The tablet flared. The spirit folded inward, screeching, sucked into the inscription like smoke into a crack. Caressa blinked. Useful. Then the shelf behind her exploded. Ahmenath had reached the records of Numas. The prince stood among burning scrolls and broken tablets, hacking through shelves with his blade. Each stroke sent records crashing down. His death mask shone in the green fire, no longer noble, only monstrous. He had become a gilded corpse, destroying the past to preserve the shape of his pride. Menhet dragged himself upright. "My prince, stop!" Ahmenath turned with a tablet clutched in his free hand. It bore the lion's sigil. Even from a distance, Menhet knew it was important. "Enough," the prince snarled. "This goes no further." The judges without names moved. They had stood silent through the first bloodshed. Now the burning of the registry woke them fully. The nearest judge lifted its crescent blade. The sound that followed was not a shout. It was a sentence. "Truth is under assault." The corpse-scribes stopped writing. Every pen lifted. Every sewn-shut face turned. The saffron jackal froze. "Oh," Caressa said quietly. "That sounds bad." The judges advanced. One assassin tried to flee past them. A crescent blade flashed once, almost lazily. His arm fell away. His body took 2 more steps before his torso split diagonally from shoulder to hip and slid apart, spilling steaming entrails across the archive floor. Another raised a spear. A judge caught it, snapped the shaft, and drove the broken end through the man's mouth. It burst out the back of his skull in a red spray. The judge lifted him by the impaled head and flung him into a burning shelf. The corpse-scribes rose from their desks. Hundreds of them, blind, burning, silent. They moved with horrible purpose. Pens and styluses clutched like little knives. One swarmed over the last carrion wretch, jabbing bronze points into its eyes, throat, ribs, belly, more joined. They wrote into its flesh. They carved names across its skin until it thrashed beneath them, shrieking, buried under a tide of dead scribes scratching judgment into muscle and bone. Ahmenath backed away. For the first time, the prince looked small. Menhet staggered toward him, one arm wrapped around his cracked ribs. "Give me the tablet." "No. You heard the oath. I am Numas." A judge turned its blank face toward the prince. "No," it said. "You are entered." The stone floor beneath Ahmenath split open, revealing steps descending into deeper darkness. The prince hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then he fled, clutching the tablet against his chest, down into the lower vaults. Menhet reached a stair. Too late. Caressa seized his shoulder. "We follow." Green fire raged behind them. Corpse-scribes dragged screaming assassins into the shadows. The saffron jackal, wounded and limping, vanished between two burning stacks with murder still in his eyes. The nearest judge lowered its crescent blade toward Menhet. "All oathbreakers shall be weighed." Menhet looked down into the stairwell after Ahmenath. From below came the groan of enormous metal limbs awakening, and the deep, patient breathing of things older than kings. He wiped blood from his eye. "Yes," he said, "then we follow." Chapter 5. The Hour of Bronze and Bone. The stairway beneath the black registry descended through a throat of stone. Menhet limped downward with one hand on the wall and the other pressed against his ribs. Every breath felt as though a hook had been lodged between his bones and pulled tight. Blood from the cut above his brow had dried into a crust over one eye. His wounded arm throbbed beneath its filthy wrapping. His thigh burned where the spear had grazed him in the trial chamber. He was a scholar priest, not a soldier, and his body had begun to inform him of this with cruel insistence. Caressa moved ahead of him, quiet despite her own wound. The cut across her ribs had reopened. Dark blood slicked her side and dripped from the hem of her leather jerkin. She had recovered 3 knives from the dead and kept one in each hand, with the third clenched between her teeth when she needed to climb. Behind them came the judges without names. They did not hurry. Their black masks floated in the gloom, smooth and eyeless. Their crescent blades caught no light. They followed like a verdict. Far below, Prince Ahmenath fled. Menhet could hear him, the scrape of gilded feet, the clatter of broken wrappings, the dry hiss of a dead prince muttering curses to ancestors who might not have existed. The stairway opened without warning into a vast hall. Menhet stopped at the threshold. For a moment, pain, fear, and pursuit fell away. There was only the terrible majesty of the place. The hall had been carved from the bedrock beneath Numas before the city above had learned to dream of immortality. It was circular, immense, and sunk deep enough that the heat of the desert had never touched it. Pillars of black stone ringed the chamber, each one carved into the shape of a kneeling captive king. Their heads bowed beneath the ceiling. Their hands were bound behind their backs. Their mouths had been stuffed with carved stones, as though speech itself had been punished. At the center stood a judgment dais. Around it waited the guardians. They were not statues. Menhet knew that at once, though they had stood still long enough for dust to bury their feet. They were colossi wrought from bronze, bone, basalt, and the embalmed remains of beasts long vanished from the desert. One had the body of a lion, but its mane was made of finger bones threaded on copper wire. Another resembled a vulture crouched low, its wings folded in plates of verdigris metal, its hooked beak long enough to split a chariot. A third was jackal-headed, with a ribcage of black iron and arms like temple columns. Others stood half-hidden in shadow, crocodile forms, serpent forms, things shaped like men but jointed wrong, all marked with the black triangle of the registry. Their eyes were dark, not empty, waiting. Ahmenath stood on the dais, clutching the stolen tablet to his chest. The lion's sigil of Numas was clear on the clay. His gold mask shone in the dim corpse light, but much of his finery had been torn away. One shoulder hung loose. His wrappings trailed behind him in strips. He looked less like a prince than a corpse dragged from its tomb before the rites were finished. He saw Menhet and raised his blade. "Come no closer." Caressa stepped into the hall. "I am beginning to hate princes." Amenath ignored her, his witch-light eyes fixed upon the nearest colossus, the jackal-headed thing. He lifted his chin and spoke in a voice that tried to fill the hall. "I am Amenath of Numas, prince of the Lion Gate, sworn scion of the royal dead. By blood, by burial, by crown, I command you, wake and serve." Nothing moved. The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Amenath's fingers tightened around the tablet. "I command you." The jackal colossus lowered its head. Its eyes opened. Green-black fire burned in sockets, rimmed with old gold. Gears turned within its chest, slow at first, then faster. Dust spilled from its joints in thick streams. The bronze plates of its arms shifted over one another with a grinding roar. For one heartbeat, Amenath seemed triumphant. Then the colossus stepped past him. It ignored him completely. The prince stared after it, his command curdling into disbelief. Menhet understood, with a cold clarity that cut through his pain. These were not royal guardians. They were not tomb sentinels waiting for the blood of kings. They were executioners built for a court where kings had come as prisoners. The colossus reached one of the remaining skeletal guards that had followed Amenath below. The skeleton raised its shield. The jackal's fist came down. Bronze met bone with a sound like a millstone crushing pottery. The shield folded inward. The skeleton's arm vanished up to the shoulder. Its rib cage collapsed into splinters. The fist struck the floor and left only a crushed smear of bone dust, old linen, and flattened bronze. The hall awoke. The lion colossus rose, shaking its mane of finger bones. The vulture unfolded wings that scraped sparks from the pillars. The crocodile guardian dragged itself from a trench in the floor, its jaws opening with the sound of a tomb door being forced apart. Caressa seized Menhet's robe. "I hope your god of clever answers is awake." "My gods are mostly dead," Menhet said. "Then borrow one." The saffron jackal emerged from another stairway, limping badly, one hand pressed to the wound in his calf. His mask had cracked further, exposing one bloodshot eye and a strip of sweat-slick skin. Behind him came no assassins. Whatever servants had remained to him had been taken by the corpse-scribes or the judges. He saw the guardians and stopped. For once, he had no graceful words. Then he looked at Menhet. "We can still end this," the jackal said. Caressa laughed, bitter and sharp. "You set the archive on fire." And yet I was right. The jackal raised his empty hand, showing he held no blade in it. "Break the central archive stone. Destroy the oath anchor. The judges lose their claim. The guardians sleep. Your city survives. Mine survives. The dead keep their lies, and the world above does not drown in old blood." Amenath snarled from the dais. "Yes, destroy it." Menhet turned toward the center. There, behind the prince, rose a black monolith no taller than a man. Its surface crawled with names. They did not sit still in the stone. They moved, shifting and rearranging themselves, forming lines of inheritance, accusation, proof. Menhet saw Sutechmar. He saw Numas. He saw dead houses. He saw erased heirs. He saw his own name appear briefly at the bottom, not yet complete. The oath anchor. If it broke, Perhaps the registry would become just another tomb of shattered clay and dead scribes. Perhaps the truth would sink again. Perhaps fewer armies would march. Perhaps fewer cities would burn. The vulture colossus shrieked. The sound tore the thought apart. It lunged across the hall, wings opening, and struck the saffron jackal with one plated pinion. He threw himself aside, but not fast enough. The wing clipped his shoulder. Bone cracked. He hit the floor and rolled, leaving a red streak behind him. At the same time, the crocodile charged. Caressa shoved Menhet one way and dove the other. The beast's jaws slammed shut between them, biting empty air with such force that chips of stone flew like shrapnel. One shard struck Menhet's cheek and opened it to the bone. He cried out and fell against a pillar. The crocodile swung its head. A broken skeletal guard was caught in the sweep and hurled across the chamber. It struck a wall hard enough to burst apart, skull, ribs, and limbs scattering in a dry explosion. Caressa ran up the crocodile's flank. She moved like a gutter rat chased by fire, boots slipping on verdigris plates, one knife clenched in her teeth. The beast bucked and scraped itself against a pillar, stone ground under bronze. She leapt from its back to a hanging funerary chain and swung over the dais, blood raining from her wounded side. "Priest!" she shouted around the knife in her mouth. "Do something clever!" Menhet saw Ahmenath below her, still clutching the tablet. The prince saw him too. Ahmenath moved toward the monolith. Not to break it, Menhet realized. To use it. To force the record. To carve his preferred truth into the anchor, as kings had always tried to do with stone, blood, and fear. "No," Menhet whispered. The jackal colossus stepped into his path. Ahmenath raised his sword and struck it across the shin. Sparks flew. The blade chipped. The colossus did not slow. It kicked him. The blow launched the prince from the dais. Ahmenath struck the ground with a crack that would have killed any living man instantly. His torso bent almost double. His left arm tore free at the shoulder and skidded across the floor, still gripping the stolen tablet. Menhet lunged for it. The saffron jackal reached it first. He snatched up the severed arm and wrenched the tablet from dead fingers. Menhet crashed into him. They went down together in a tangle of robes, blood, and curses. The jackal drove an elbow into Menhet's ribs. Pain exploded white. Menhet gagged and nearly blacked out. The jackal rolled on top of him and drew a thin dagger from his boot. "I am sorry," he said, though his voice held no sorrow at all. The dagger came down. Menhet caught his wrist with both hands. The blade stopped an inch from his eye. His arms shook. The jackal was wounded, but stronger, trained for murder where Menhet was trained for dust and ink. The point sank lower. Menhet saw his own frightened reflection in the metal. Then Caressa dropped from the chain. She landed behind the jackal and drove both knees into his spine. He screamed. The dagger went wide, slicing Menhet's ear. Caressa wrapped one arm around the jackal's throat and stabbed him in the side, again and again, short, brutal thrusts that punched wet sounds from his body. The jackal bucked like a speared animal. He slammed his head backward into her face. Her nose broke with a sharp crack. Blood burst over her mouth. She cursed and held on. Menhet grabbed the stolen tablet. The jackal saw it and clawed for him. Caressa shoved her knife up under the rim of his mask. The blade slid into the soft flesh beneath his jaw. She twisted. Blood flooded down her wrist. The jackal convulsed, choking, but still did not die. He tore free and rolled away. one hand clamped to his throat, dragging breath through blood. "Stubborn bastard," Charessa spat. Across the hall, Amenath rose. His body was broken. His missing arm bled no blood, only dry embalming powder and green sparks of necromantic will. His chest had caved inward. His death mask had split, revealing the shriveled horror beneath. Black gums, yellow teeth, skin tight as old leather over a skull full of royal hatred. He came for Menhet. "Give it to me." Menhet backed toward the monolith with the tablet in his hands. The judges without names had entered the hall. They spread around the dais, crescent blades lowered. They did not intervene. Not yet. This was still a weighing. Amenath staggered closer. "I am the city," he hissed. "I am its memory. I am its honor. You are ink. You are dust. You are a servant who forgot the shape of his knees." Menhet reached the monolith. The moving names swam before him. He understood then. The rites were not commands, not royal passwords, not pleas to dead gods. They were witness formulae. He pressed the stolen tablet against the black stone and spoke, voice raw, blood running into his mouth. "I, Menhet of the Seven Seals, scholar priest of Numas, stand as witness before the unburied record." The guardians stopped. Even Amenath hesitated. Menhet felt the monolith seize him, not his hand, not his flesh, his name, his soul. The thing inside him that priests promised would be judged after death. It caught him like a hook through the heart. He screamed. Every lie in the hall screamed with him. Names rushed through his skull. Fathers, mothers, killers, bastards, usurpers, children drowned in bowls, brothers strangled in bridal chambers, priests sealing false cartouches while armies burned outside city walls, Numas rising on a foundation of sanctified fraud, Sutek Ma crowned over a pit of murdered heirs, dynasties built from knives and prayers, and the silence of scribes who knew better. Menhet's knees buckled. Charessa caught him. Amenath lunged. The prince's remaining hand closed around Menhet's throat. His fingers were iron. Menhet choked, feet scraping against the floor. Amenath lifted him one-handed, broken body animated by pure fury. "You will not shame me." Charessa moved. Her blade struck the prince beneath the ribs, where the heart scarab lay hidden under layers of ancient linen and gold. Once, the knife glanced off. Twice, it cut through wrapping. The third thrust sank deep. Amenath shrieked. Not in pain, in outrage. Charessa planted her boot against his hip and drove the knife harder. Something cracked inside him, not bone, but amulet stone. Green light burst from the wound. Amenath dropped Menhet and staggered back, clutching at his chest. Charessa ripped the knife free. A black scarab of obsidian and gold came with it, split down the middle, twitching like a living heart. She crushed it under her heel. Amenath's body collapsed. His gold mask hit the floor first. Then his limbs gave way, folding into a heap of wrappings, bones, jewels, and dust. The green fire in his eyes dwindled to pinpricks. He was not destroyed. Menhet knew that. A prince of Numas was not ended so easily. But he was silent. The monolith released Menhet. He fell to his hands and knees, coughing blood. The judges turned toward him. One stepped forward and lowered its crescent blade until the edge rested against the stone beside his hand. "Witness bound," it said. The guardians withdrew into stillness one by one. Bronze limbs locked, bone manes settled. The vulture folded its wings. The crocodile sank back into its trench. The saffron jackal, pale and bleeding, dragged himself toward a shadowed passage. He looked back once, his one visible eye bright with hate and terror. Caressa raised a knife. Menhet shook his head. "Let him carry the warning." She wiped blood from her broken nose and spat red onto the floor. "You priests have terrible hobbies." Behind them, the hall began to collapse. Not quickly, not yet. Dust streamed from the ceiling. Cracks spread through the captive king pillars. The way back groaned as old mechanisms sealed what had been opened. Menhet clutched the copied truth inside his mind like a burning coal. Caressa hauled him upright. The nearest judge pointed its blade toward an ascending passage. "Leave," it said. "Remember." Menhet looked once at the fallen prince, at the broken scarab under Caressa's heel, at the monolith where his own name now crawled among the dead. Then he ran. Chapter 6. When the dead remember, they ran upward through the dying throat of the earth, while Numas shook above them like a skull full of angry spirits. The passage vomited dust. Stones cracked overhead and came down in jagged chunks, smashing against the steps, exploding into stinging fragments. Menhet stumbled more than he climbed, one arm clamped around his broken ribs, the other clutching at the wall as though the black stone might show mercy. Each breath tasted of blood. Each heartbeat hammered the oath deeper into him. Witness bound. The words had not been spoken into his ears. They had been carved into the hidden meat of his soul. Behind him, the lower hall roared as ancient mechanisms resealed the judgment chamber. Bronze dragged against basalt. Bone colossi returned to their vigil. Somewhere below, Prince Ahmenath's ruined body scraped across stone, perhaps twitching, perhaps crawling, perhaps already gathering the pieces of his pride around the cracked ruin of his heart scarab. Caressa shoved Menhet from behind when he slowed. "Move, priest." "I am moving. You are bleeding artistically. That is not the same thing." Her own voice was thick from her broken nose. Blood had dried over her mouth and chin, making her look like something that had bitten its way out of a grave. One eye had begun to swell shut. The wound in her side had soaked her leathers black. Still, she climbed with her knives in hand, because pain to Caressa seemed less a warning than an insult to be ignored. Ahead, the passage narrowed. A stone slab had dropped halfway across the stair, leaving only a crawling gap beneath it. Beyond, pale corpse light flickered. Caressa dropped flat and wriggled through first. Menhet followed, dragging himself on elbows and knees. The slab pressed down against his back. His ribs shrieked. For one dreadful moment his belt caught on a jagged tooth of stone and held him there while the entire passage groaned. He heard something behind them. A wet dragging. Menhet turned his head as far as the gap allowed. A hand emerged from the dust below. Not human, not whole. It was wrapped in saffron cloth, gone dark with blood. 2 fingers missing, nails torn to the quick from clawing through stone. The saffron jackal hauled himself onto the stair, mask broken, one side of his face exposed and slick with red. The wound beneath his jaw gaped every time he breathed. The flesh there opened and closed like a second mouth. His one visible eye fixed on Menhet. "Help me," he rasped. Caressa already beyond the slab, reached back and grabbed Menhet's wrists. "Do not." The jackal crawled closer. His dagger scraped along the stair in his other hand. "Priest," he gurgled, "your oath. Preserve truth. I know truths. I can speak them." Menhet stared at him through dust and pain. The slab shifted lower. Caressa pulled harder. "He'll gut you the moment he can stand." The jackal smiled. Blood ran over his teeth. "She is honest. I admire that." Behind him, something black and smooth appeared in the passage. A judge without names. It did not hurry. It did not need to. Its mask emerged from the dust like a moon rising over a battlefield. Its crescent blade dragged along the wall, carving sparks from stone. The jackal heard it. His expression broke. He thrust his bleeding hand under the slab toward Menhet. "Please." Menhet reached back. Caressa swore viciously, but she did not let go of him. Menhet caught the jackal's wrist and pulled. The man screamed as the movement tore his wounds open. He slid forward inch by inch, leaving a smear of blood on the stair. The slab ground lower, stone pressed into Menhet's spine. His vision blurred. The jackal's shoulders reached the gap. Then his dagger flashed. Caressa had been right. The blade stabbed toward Menhet's face, but the angle was poor and the jackal weak. It sliced across Menhet's cheek instead of his eye. Hot blood spilled down his jaw. Menhet recoiled, striking his head against the underside of the slab. Caressa acted faster than thought. She reached over Menhet, caught the jackal by his broken mask, and smashed his face against the edge of the slab. Once. The lacquer cracked further. Twice. Bone crunched. 3 times. And his nose burst flat beneath the mask, spraying blood across Menhet's robe. The judge stepped closer. Caressa snarled. "You should have stayed politely rescued." She drove her knife through the jackal's wrist, pinning his hand to the stone. The saffron jackal howled. Caressa dragged Menhet clear. The slab dropped. It came down on the jackal at the shoulders. His scream turned into a horrible compressed grunt as the stone crushed him. For one moment his head and one arm remained on their side of the blockage, twitching, fingers clawing at nothing. Blood squeezed from his mouth in a thick gush. The judge paused beside him. Its blade fell once. The jackal's head rolled free, the broken mask still attached, the exposed eye wide and furious until dust covered it. Menhet lay gasping on the other side of the slab. Caressa wiped her knife on her boot. "Now we are even," she said. "For what?" "For me being right." They climbed. The passage spat them into the Black Registry's upper galleries, or what remained of them. The vault had become a storm of ash and paper. Green fire crawled across the highest shelves, burning with a greedy intelligence, stripping names from scrolls before turning the scrolls themselves to black lace. Corpse-scribes moved through the smoke in solemn lines, carrying tablets away from the flames. Some burned as they walked. One had no head, only a column of blue fire rising from its neck, yet its hands still clutched a stack of records to its chest. The judges were everywhere now. They cut down anything that still resisted the sealing. Carrion spirits, wounded assassins, maddened dead things dislodged from older vaults. A vulture wraith burst from a burning scroll cage and swooped low over the gallery, its beak tearing the skull from a corpse-scribe. A judge caught it by the throat mid-flight. The spirit thrashed, wings beating through shelves and scattering clay tablets like storm hail. The judge squeezed. The wraith burst into a cloud of feathers, teeth, and grave cold vapor. Menhet saw the way out across a collapsing bridge. Beyond it lay the trial chambers. Beyond those, the sealed quarter. Beyond that, the tunnel to Numas and the brutal mercy of the sun. The bridge cracked as they stepped onto it. Below, the registry plunged into darkness. Shelf upon shelf, aisle upon aisle, the dead records of kingdoms descending farther than sight. Names whispered upward in 1,000 voices. Caressa went first, light-footed despite exhaustion. Menhet followed, every step sending knives through his ribs. Halfway across, the bridge split. A section fell away beneath his left foot. He dropped. Caressa spun and caught his wrist. The impact nearly tore his arm from its socket. Menhet dangled over the abyss, feet kicking loose air, blood dripping from his chin into the archive dark. Far below, something with many hands moved among the shelves, turning its faceless head upward. Caressa braced one boot against the broken stone and pulled. Her wound opened fully. Blood poured down her side, pattering onto Menhet's face. "Climb!" she hissed. "I am trying. Try as though I will drop you." He believed her enough to find strength. Menhet hooked one knee over the edge and dragged himself up. The bridge shuddered. Behind them, a shelf tower collapsed in a slow, majestic ruin, spilling thousands of tablets into the void. They fell like a clay avalanche, each one striking others, breaking, ringing, bursting into dust. The sound was not destruction alone. It was accusation. They reached the far side as the bridge gave way completely. The trial chambers had changed. The chamber of the stone crown was empty, but the broken crown now sat whole upon the backless throne, its cracks sealed with a vein of black glass. The chamber of feast murder stank of fresh blood, though nothing living remained there. Painted nobles on the walls had turned their heads to watch Menhet pass. In the chamber of erased names, the bronze tablets whispered as he went by. Some spoke his name, some spoke names he had not yet learned. At the final door, the nearest judge caught up with them. Caressa raised both knives, though her hands trembled. The judge did not attack. It stood in the doorway, crescent blade lowered, black mask angled toward Menhet. "You carry the oath." Menhet nodded. "Speaking hurt too much. You will preserve the whole record. Yes. You will not give truth into one hand only. No. You will be watched." Menhet looked past the judge into the dark. Behind it, more masks waited there, more blades, more silence. "I know," he said. The judge stepped back. The outer door opened. Heat struck them like a hammer. They emerged into the sealed quarter, where the ancient streets were tearing themselves apart. The dry canal had split open, swallowing the bridge where the assassins and skeletal guards had fought. Bronze crocodiles thrashed below, crushed beneath falling masonry, their jaws snapping even as stone buried them. Scorpion constructs skittered madly over walls, only to be smashed by collapsing arches. Statues of headless kings toppled and shattered across the streets, their stone bodies bursting into pale dust. One scorpion leapt at Caressa from a wall. She ducked too slowly. Its claw caught her shoulder and slammed her against a pillar. Menhet heard the breath leave her. The tail rose, hooked blade dripping green venom. Menhet seized a fallen khopesh from the rubble. He swung badly, desperately. The blade struck the scorpion's tail just below the barb. Metal screamed. The tail did not sever, but it bent aside enough that the venomous hook punched into the pillar beside Caresa's head instead of through her eye. She snarled, grabbed the embedded tail with both hands, and rammed one knife into the joint again and again until the mechanism split. Black oil sprayed across her face. The scorpion reeled. Menhet brought the khopesh down on its human-faced mask, once cracking bronze, twice splitting it. On the third blow, the mask caved in. Something inside squealed, like a trapped rat being crushed under a boot. The construct collapsed, legs curling inward. Caressa spat oil and blood. That was almost heroic. It was mostly terror. That is what heroism is, when stripped of songs. They staggered onward. At the first basalt door, the passage to the temple had begun to close. The opening narrowed with each grinding heartbeat. Beyond it, Menhet saw the lower archive and the faint blue glow of corpse lamps. They ran. Caressa slipped through first. Menhet followed, but something caught his ankle. A skeletal hand, one of Ahmenath's destroyed retainers, had crawled from the rubble, half a ribcage, and one arm dragging behind it. It clutched Menhet with mindless obedience, perhaps following its prince's last command, perhaps simply unwilling to let the living leave where the dead remained. Menhet kicked. The grip held. The door ground lower. Caressa dropped beside him and hacked at the skeletal wrist. Bone chips flew. The hand tightened, sharp fingertips cutting into Menhet's flesh. "Hold still," she snapped. "I am held." Her knife came down one final time. The wrist broke. Menhet tore free and rolled through the opening just as the basalt slab sealed behind him. The skeletal hand remained locked around his ankle, severed at the wrist. Caressa pried it loose finger by finger and tossed it against the wall. The impact shattered it. For several moments they lay on the floor of the lower archive, surrounded by the bodies of the assassins from the night before. The corpse lamps still burned. The blood had dried black. The ruined tablets still lay scattered across the stone. Above them, Numas trembled, then stilled. Dawn entered the archive as a thin gold line beneath the outer door. Menhet laughed once. It hurt so much he almost vomited. Caressa sat up slowly, pressing one hand to her ribs. "Never ask me to guide you anywhere again. I did not ask the first time." "Good. Keep that tradition." They were found by the priesthood just after sunrise. Old Lishe priests came with skeletal guards, incense bearers, and embalming hooks, their parchment faces unreadable beneath tall headdresses. They found Menhet, bloodied, half dead, and clutching a shard of black stone that had not been in his hand when he entered the vault. Upon it, tiny signs moved like insects under glass. They found Caressa stealing a funerary ring from one of the dead assassins. She did not stop when they looked at her. The council chamber of Numas lay beneath a roof of lapis tiles and hanging chains of finger bones. Menhet stood there, washed but not clean, bandaged but not healed, while the senior priests listened in silence. Caressa leaned against a pillar under guard, though none of the skeletal warriors seemed eager to get too close to her knives. Prince Ahmenath was brought in later, or what remained of him. His body had been gathered from the lower halls by servants who would never speak of what they had seen. His death mask had been hammered back into shape, but a crack still ran from brow to chin. His missing arm had been reattached with gold pins. The heart scarab within him had been replaced, though Menhet saw the green flame in his eyes flicker weakly, irregularly. The prince looked at Menhet. Hatred filled the chamber more thickly than incense. Menhet bowed, not deeply. He gave the priests the proof against Sutekmar. He gave them the proof against Numas. He gave them copies, made not by hand but by oath, drawn from the shard of moving stone. Each copy sealed itself when finished, marked with the black triangle. A murmur passed through the council. One ancient priest reached for the Numas record with a trembling claw. Menhet pulled it back. "No single hand," he said. The chamber went silent. Ahmeneth's fingers scraped the arms of his throne. Menhet placed one sealed copy before each temple faction, one before the funerary judges, one before the military dead, one before the keepers of the Lion Gate, one he retained himself. "No single prince," he said. "No single priest, no single lie." For a moment, he thought they would kill him. Perhaps they considered it. Perhaps some imagined his skin peeled from his body in sacred strips, his tongue nailed to the archive door, his soul chained as a warning to ambitious scribes. Then, from the shadow behind Menhet, a figure stepped forward, a judge without names. No one had seen it enter. Every skeletal guard in the room lowered its weapon. Every priest recoiled. Even Ahmenath sank back into his throne, as if the weight of the grave had doubled upon him. The judge said nothing. It did not need to. The council accepted the records. Not gladly, not cleanly, not without hatred, but they accepted them. By sunset, sealed copies had been carried to hidden vaults throughout Numas. By midnight, riders of bone and bronze had gone out beneath the stars, bearing fragments of the truth toward allied temples and hostile courts alike. By dawn, the first rumors had begun to move through the dead city like rats under a granary floor. Sutekmar would deny everything. Numas would deny almost everything. Armies might march, tomb gates might open, old kings might wake, with fresh grievances rattling in their dry throats. Truth, men had learned, did not cleanse, it infected. Caressa received her promised reward 3 days later. A purse of gold, a written pardon for crimes carefully described as uncertain in number, and a warning never to enter the lower archives again. On her way out of the palace, she stole a small ivory idol from a shrine niche. Menhet saw. She saw him seeing. He said nothing. She grinned through her bruises and vanished into the market crowds beyond the Lion Gate, where living merchants haggled beneath the gaze of dead kings and pretended not to fear the city under their feet. That night, Menhet returned alone to the lower archive. The door to the passage beneath the temple was sealed. New wards covered it. New skeletons stood watch. New lies, perhaps, already settling around the old truth like dust. The judge stood beside him in silence. Menhet did not ask whether it would remain. He knew. Far below, beneath the buried streets, beneath the black registry, beneath the judgment hall of bronze and bone, corpse-scribes resumed their work, their pens scratched in darkness, their tablets filled, their blind faces bent over the endless labor of memory. Upon a fresh slab of black clay, a dead hand carved a new entry. In the rain of dust, Menhet of the 7 Seals opened the truth and did not wholly betray it. The stylus paused. Then somewhere deep beneath Numas, where no map admitted passage and no priest had ever prayed, another vault door cracked open. In the dark beyond it, something ancient remembered its name.